All right. I, all right, I'm transitioning and here we are. Welcome, Brian Ives. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm so excited to have you here today because we have so much to talk about.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jamie. The people you've had before are so great, so I'm just like,
Well,
I hope I'm
you're
not
pretty
boring.
darn great yourself. So,
Thanks.
um, can you tell, our viewers and our listeners, kind of about your journey to where you're at now?
I might be older than I look. It's been a long journey. But I'll try and make it really fast. I didn't know really what I wanted to do out of college. I ended up at my father's advice, interning at a record label as a college graduate. I interned at Mercury Records
Was your
in the
father in
A&R.
the music industry?
No, no, no. He owns an architect firm, but he just said like, why don't you try and do something you like? So I just started, I started interning as like a 23-year-old or something like that. Um, in A&R at Mercury Records. At the time I thought I wanted to be an A&R person. Thank God that didn't happen. And I had a bunch of other internships. I interned at CMJ. I interned at a management company. Finally got my first job at Concrete Marketing, which I'm sure you're pretty familiar with still.
Uh,
I was the associate editor. I worked for Mike Moses, and obviously for Bob Chiappardi as the associate editor of their magazine that came out at first every 2 weeks, and then monthly, and then we sort of went under. And luckily, right when that happened, I got a job offer from Tracy Zamat's husband, who I'm sure you know her, and the late
John
great John
Loscalzo.
Loscalzo
Yeah.
offered me a job writing a radio prep service, which I had never heard of. I was like, "What is that?" And so basically, you write scripts for radio DJs so that it sounds like they wrote the news story. And if you do interviews, you send them the clips so they could act like they did the interview or whatever. It's a paid service. Did that for 2 years. Was dying to work at MTV. Ended up at MTV.com in 1999. It was like when the website was new and really the web was new. Went from there to MTV2, where I wrote scripts for VJs. That's all I did all day.
Oh,
And back then, MTV2 was also really new and exciting because, we played videos and that's it. And like everyone in the industry was really excited about it. But as you know, that doesn't rate as far as ratings go. So,
yeah.
I was there for a little while. I went to VH1 where I worked for their radio prep service, very similar to what I did at my prior job. From there, somebody stole me to VH1 News, where I became a news producer with zero television experience, and I just had to like kind of figure out what to do on a shoot and figure out what to do in an edit and stuff. I was there for quite a few years. I got let go, as happens to everybody at MTV and VH1,
Hmm.
in a layoff. A bunch of us lost our jobs. I ended up going to Sirius XM, actually Sirius, before even the merger, where I worked on the website, which was a very different sort of content because it was really just like putting together the TV guide. Like it wasn't like creative in that kind of way. Although I was there when YouTube started, so like we started Sirius's YouTube page, which now has, I don't know, like well into the tens of millions of page views. Um, from there, I worked for John Loscalzo once again at CBS's radio.com. I think that's probably where I met you.
Yeah,
Um,
I knew of you before, but I thought you were too cool for me to be friends with.
Me? I'm not like that at all.
No, but
But
I didn't
so
know you. That's the thing. Like,
right. And then, Entercom bought CBS Radio from CBS and they got rid of a bunch of us. And then I ended up at Loudwire, where I know we worked together a bunch of times. I was
oh
the
yeah.
editor in chief there. And then a bunch of us lost our jobs. And pretty quickly after that, I got my current job, which is I'm the editor in chief of Beasley Media, which is a radio station company. It's still a family owned business. The guy who founded the company in 1961 as a high school principal who started one radio station, his high school's radio station, turned it into this big company. They've never sold it out. His daughter's the CEO. Two of his sons are the SVPs. His granddaughter is my boss. And I've been here since January of 2019. and I have a team of 4 people, one in every sort of major format. I have a rock writer, a country writer, a top 40 writer, and a hip hop writer.
Wow.
And so they just, they write stuff that's relevant to those audiences and syndicate them to all those sites, but also they have to write about, lifestyle stuff.
Yeah.
Like if Chick-fil-A, like a story today was like Chick-fil-A sort of announced that they don't have unlimited sauce. So like that's a story that will strangely get a lot of traffic because
I'm
people
sure.
might Google why can't I get sauce at Chick-fil-A or what's up with Chick-fil-A. So we write stories like that, or of course like gossip stuff, which is not at all my thing. I really like my job, but one day when I retire, I will be so happy to delete the TMZ app from my phone
Oh
because
man.
I find their existence to be appalling, and I hate that I sort of play into it. But it's sort of like if you're in that world, like they're wrong a lot, but they're
Yeah.
also right a lot. So it's like
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
actually curious what you think of them as a publicist because they must
I
be
get
kind of a
stalked
scourge,
by them because I work with Tommy Lee, but
right?
um, you know, I think
But
they're
even like when Vinnie Paul died, like TMZ doesn't care about Pantera, never
right.
did, never would, But all of a sudden, when he died, they were on every bit of the story. To me, I actually felt it was like a violation of like a
I
lot,
mean,
it was like a violation of culture, like get the hell out of here. You have nothing to do with Pantera. You don't know us. But they got a lot of traffic from it. So
but that's the thing about you, Brian, and the reason why I wanted to have you on here. It's like you are so into the culture, and you are such a music lover, even after all this time working in it.
yeah, that's
And
true.
and you're very knowledgeable. And I'm always saying like, yeah, Ro Coley is on, and he's saying the Pantera TMZ thing was almost like cultural appropriation. It was.
It was, I
Yeah,
mean, it's you really can't. I mean, like if you're in a metal band, it's hard for you to say cultural appropriation. Anybody could buy a t-shirt or whatever, but like the way they just sort of dove into it, and I guess that's what they do. If another metal icon or a punk rock icon died tomorrow,
yeah,
all of a sudden they're all about it, and I just
right.
find it appalling. Like and on top of that, some of the mistakes that they've made, even she's not in the metal community, but like when Demi Lovato overdosed, she overdosed on prescription drugs, but I forgot what they said. I think they said like she overdosed on heroin. Like I mean, it's a big
That's a big
difference.
difference. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a big difference. They killed Miley Cyrus one time, like her bus got into an accident and somehow turned out she was dead, but it was a bus in her entourage, which she was not in,
right.
so it's like stuff like, and then it's like, if they're wrong, it's like, oh, we're TMZ. It's okay. Like, so it's
Yeah,
like they get the best of both worlds in a way for themselves.
yeah.
So
I mean, I'm so guilty of being kind of like addicted to stuff like that. Like, have you ever seen Dumois? They're
no.
like more extreme TMZ. I'll have to send it to you. It's fascinating.
Wow.
But
I mean, I also don't like to judge anybody. Like, I don't like to be like the music guy who's like, you should not do this or that. I do actually believe that TMZ is bad for American culture, but like
mm,
generally speaking, I don't like to be like, you watch reality shows, shame on you. Like, I don't want to be
no,
that guy.
I know, but I do love the music purist in you. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here. I know
Yeah.
we were talking about earlier, we were talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I love your take on this. So,
Yeah, let's talk about it.
yeah.
My Iron Maiden shirt on.
Nice. Oh man. Well, it's funny. I was doing press with Perry Farrell and Taylor from Foo Fighters,
Yeah, yeah.
and the weirdest thing was like the writer that was talking to them was like, "Oh, you guys, you're nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame," and Taylor goes, "Perry is," and she's
Right.
like, "No, you," and he goes, "Perry should be." Like, and that's exactly what you were saying. So, you
Yeah.
and Taylor Hawkins agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would go so far as to say that Dave Grohl doesn't apologize for his success. He doesn't apologize for the Foo Fighters success, and they
Nor
deserve
should
every
he.
bit of it. But I think if you were going to sit down and ask him, like, should you really be getting in before Jane's Addiction? Should you really be getting in? Forgetting even all the underground bands that all those guys love, like Bad Brains or X, or bands that are not bands that you would have to explain to people who they are. But of like the bands that played arenas and stuff, like if you said to Dave, should you be getting in before Soundgarden or Jane's Addiction, he'd be like, no way. I mean, I've interviewed him like once or twice. I don't know him well, but I think he would acquiesce that point, and like Taylor is probably the least music purist in that band, and one of the least music purist people in like the world of alternative rock, whatever that means today. But
I didn't know until yesterday that he played with Alanis Morissette before Foo Fighters.
Yeah, that was his first. I think that's where he met Eric Avery too.
Yes.
Actually, even before that, he played with. I don't know if you remember this woman, Sass Jordan. She was like a blues rock singer, sort of like in the Johnny Lang, Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
Oh, okay.
Sort of
Yeah.
lane in the it was like in the 90s, like they were still trying to figure out how to make blues rock people big, and so he was in Sass Jordan's band, and like there's a YouTube video of Sass joining the Foo Fighters on stage and talking about Taylor being in her band before all that stuff. So,
and you know what? I love Foo Fighters. I think they're going to get in. I think they should be in, but I don't think it's now.
I mean, I think Dave Grohl would probably agree with that for sure. Personality goes a long way, and I think people really love the guy. He's a great ambassador for rock music. He's a guy who will like show up with Lamb of God one day and then like jam with Paul McCartney the next day. Like he doesn't have any sense of snobbery. And like if you watched the Sound City documentary, he has like guys who are super cred guys like Neil Young and Tom Petty. And then he has Barry Manilow and Rick Springfield, and like he's cool with all that stuff. And I think that's like, that goes a long way for sure.
Oh, yeah. I met him when he was doing Probot. He was thinking of putting it out on Roadrunner, so he came and met all of us, and we were all like, "Oh, Dave Grohl's here,"
And at that point, people didn't really know that he was as into metal. Like now everybody knows.
Yeah.
But like back then, like everyone didn't know that Motorhead was that big of a deal to him, or that like he knew who King Diamond was or Sepultura is or anything like that. So like that album was a real revelation, and I love it. But yeah, I mean, I would have voted for the Foo Fighters at some point. I actually am a voter. I still have my ballot with me. Although the perforated part is when you mail in. So I don't want anyone to think I didn't vote when I had the opportunity.
But people like you are the people that should be voting, and for the Grammys too. You know what I
mean?
I
used to be a Grammy voter, and every like on the day that the nominations were announced, this was for like probably about 10 years, there was no streaming. So I would download like probably $100 worth of stuff from the iTunes store just so that I knew, like I wanted to at least, I wouldn't download whole albums or whatever, but I would download lots. Sometimes I probably did, but I downloaded songs. So that way, if I'm voting in a category and I know 2 of the songs and not the other 3, at least this way I could like listen to them and be informed. And, I like to be connected to blues and I like to be connected to folk. So I would listen to all of those and decide which one, like what best I felt represented the genre, and not, Sting is doing a blues album or something. Not that he ever did, but like somebody much more famous than everybody else is in it. So I'll just vote for them because I recognize their name. Well, so I always took it really seriously. I'm not a voter anymore because I think at one point in between jobs, I stopped paying my dues just because I had to cut costs, and it's pretty expensive. Yeah. And then when I tried to become a voter again, they questioned, my relevance, which I get. I was a voter because I did liner notes for a lot of albums and stuff. And I hadn't, they're like, well, when's the last one that you did? And I'm like, it was about 10 years ago. So they're like, we want people who are more current. So I was like,
80-year-old songwriters, like, honestly, the people that are voting are like, forget about it. Are they relevant is what I want to know,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole, I wouldn't have voted for The Weeknd personally, but the fact that that guy got no nominations when that album was just massive just showed, it either shows that they're out of touch and I mean, this is a whole different conversation, or it shows that they were being vindictive because they really did not want him playing the Super Bowl a week before the or 2 weeks
Yeah.
before the Grammys or whatever it was. So either way, it's a terrible, terrible look for them. And like
Yeah.
they just basically, they kind of flush their I mean, you could say every award show is irrelevant, but I think they really flushed their relevance down the toilet with that one.
Well, in the
Even
rock world too. I mean, they
oh,
cannot win for losing with the rock stuff. I mean, they like I knew the year Slipknot was going to win
yeah.
because they were the only one that somebody completely out of touch with rock would have heard of.
Right, exactly. I mean, the year that I was at Loudwire, we were actually surprised and impressed at how good the nominees were. That would have been 2018. And I think that was the year where like I think they had like a metal, they had a metal sort of secret, not secret, but like a committee, and I think like Josh Bernstein, I think might have been on that
Maria
for
Ferrera was on it.
I was going to say Maria, I know was on it. I wouldn't be surprised if Catherine Turman was on that. So like they were getting people who really knew what they were talking about. I don't know if they've done that since.
No,
I was
I
pretty
think they
stoked.
just had a news thing that said they eliminated that. And I'm like, that was the only thing making it good, for God's sakes.
Yeah, I mean, I was glad to see Body Count win, but again, Body Count like maybe won it, because of their name recognition and people love Ice-T and he never gets awards. But I would still say like their prior album was so much better than the one that they won this for,
Right.
but I guess sometimes with that stuff, it is a lifetime achievement award in a way, like
And
who
I
would have
think it's
thought when,
where they are in the culture. You know what I mean?
I mean, I went to, what was Sonic Temple called before that? Rock on the Range,
Yeah.
Danny Wimmer's thing. And Body Count was the oldest band playing there, the oldest heavy metal band playing there, the oldest band of the 3-day festival. And they've been doing it. I mean, who would have thought this band would have lasted for 20 years? And, but I was curious to see how it would go over, because it's one thing to book, this too. Like, it's one thing for a promoter to book a band that sort of rounds out what that poster looks like on
Yeah.
announcement day. But it's another, like sometimes those bands don't really matter, but Body Count went over really well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I was super surprised because they've been gone for a really long time. Obviously, they're much older, but like, so I feel like it wasn't an embarrassment. Whereas like sometimes, even if a great band wins, like Sabbath, who are my favorite metal band, they won a Grammy, but it was for like the live version of Iron Man or War Pigs. And it's like, well, that song is from 1970, and just because they're like putting it on a live album and you've heard of it, that's not what metal is in whatever year that was. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's funny, Rose says 30 years for Body Count. Wow, that's a long time.
yeah, I mean that first Body Count album came out in, well, I think Ice-T had a song on his album OG, and I think that was in 91 or 92, and then or that was 91, and then the Body Count album came out in 92. So I'm just saying this off the top of my head, so I
Yeah,
might be
yeah,
wrong.
yeah. I mean, I think that I think that one of the things that I find is like metal as a genre is very accepting. If they like the music, doesn't matter who's making it, I think.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things I really like about the hard rock world, like
yeah.
because I didn't come in as a fan.
Oh,
When I interviewed at Roadrunner,
because you
the
used to be at Astroworks, right?
no, I was at the Enclave actually, Tom
Oh, the
Zink's
Enclave.
Enclave.
Right,
But
right,
I had friends at Astroworks, and that's what I was a fan of.
right.
And Case Wessel said to me, "Do you like metal?" And I said, "Not really, but it doesn't matter what I like."
Yeah.
And that's why they hired me.
I mean,
Really, if I want to know if something's good, I make Ro listen to it. So
that's funny. But yeah, I mean, the metal audience, they get a bad rap, and a lot of times they deserve it. I learned this at Loudwire looking at the Facebook comments, frankly.
yeah,
Like, I mean, obviously people who want to complain about stuff
right.
are the ones more likely to do it on Facebook than somebody who's just like, oh, cool or whatever, but it would be like, we would write a story about Tom Morello has a new custom guitar or changed his guitar strings or something. And they'd be like, why do you always write about politics? You're just a bunch of liberals, you know? But,
Really?
you know, like, I mean, I think the biggest example, I mean, a lot of people thought, including Rob Halford, that when he came out in 99 or 2000 or whatever year that was, that like metalheads would reject it. And like, they just didn't care.
Right.
Didn't seem to matter. And, you know, like, I think Ice-T doing a metal band, like at first people, you know, it's like if a rock star goes to Nashville and think they're going to be country, you know, like you've got to put in the time and you've got to get the cred. We know your famous name, but like, are you really doing this? And with Ice, I mean, like him and Ernie C, they're the only founding members left. The other three guys died. But, you know, like they've put in the work and I think they've earned metal's respect, you know, and obviously everyone knows with Ice, like, he's a multi-millionaire from Law and Order SVU. So he doesn't really need to be doing this. This isn't like a gimmick or like, you know, he obviously is doing it because he loves it. You know, and so like they've earned their credit. And yeah, I mean, I do think the metal audience is accepting in that way, but like I guess it's the loud ones who are not accepting of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Or they'll be like, you know, if you like a band that's people of color, oh, it's identity politics, or you know, if like I tried to interview as many female artists as I could at Loudwire. And I remember, you know, reading like in the YouTube comments or the Facebook comments or something, you know, like you're only talking to them because they're women. And it's like, that's not really, you know, like if I didn't think they were good, I wouldn't talk, you know, I wouldn't talk to
Right, right. You know, I think everyone's always going to have a problem with
them.
something. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, at the end of the day, like, it's a great editor that that stays the course regardless, you
Yeah.
know, because you can't like waver with people. And you know, and I admire that about you because you know your reasoning for doing things. You know, you don't back down on people. And you know, I mean, that's like, it's hard because there's a lot of pressure in a position like that.
No, there. I mean, particularly a Loudwire because it means so much to so many people.
Right.
And you know, like we had a story once. We were just sort of reporting on what somebody else had reported that Dave Draymond from the Disturbed used autotune or something like that.
Mm.
And you know, my former boss, Mike Moses, who's still a good friend, was Dave's publicist, and he's like, "You got to take that down." You know, and normally, even from a publicist who I'm friends with, I'm like, I can't just take it down because you dislike it, you
Right.
know, but he was like, it's demonstrably untrue, you know,
Oh,
and he could probably sue you for that, you know, because it's sort of defames his character as a guy who's like a really good singer. So, you know, like stuff like that, like I don't just dig in my heels and say, you know,
well,
like
you're
I'm not gonna, you know, waver or whatever, but you know, like when presented with evidence of why it was wrong to do, I'm like, okay, cool. But you know,
right, right.
I had
And
I had
you know, and I think that like for me when I'm giving interviews to somebody, I want it to be somebody I can trust.
yeah.
You know, like because like you know, your dude is going to slip up every now and then, you know. And it's, you know, it's that's the thing. It's like who will understand that and factor that into how they write, you
Yeah.
know? Like just because you say something dopey doesn't mean, you know, that should rule the article because it's clickbait, you know?
No, I mean, like, there's things that you know, sometimes if somebody says something and you know they meant it, it's
Right.
like, you know, even if you're good friends with the publicist, it's like, I have to, you know, my duty has to be to like my company and my boss. Like,
Yeah.
if this is worth its weight, if this is worth a lot of, if this is going to get a lot of traffic, I can't just like squelch it. But there have been times where like I interviewed, I won't even say the artist's name, but he's an R&B legend, and when I say that, I mean from like the 1960s,
Oh,
like
okay.
Stax Motown era. And you know, like I was talking to him, and like something came up, and he said some like pretty homophobic stuff, and I was like, that will, you know, and the guy was like mostly retired too. I'm like, this will dominate his news cycle forever. You know, probably he'll never do an interview and not be asked about it again. But he
Right.
was an old guy, like in his 70s, and you know, and while I don't excuse homophobia from anybody, it was just like it just didn't feel like the thing to, you know, it just felt like a cheap shot. Or even, you know, my politics, I'm pretty progressive. I
Yeah.
interviewed Nugent one time for pretty
Oh.
extensively for about an hour, and he was talking to me about his real liberal friend, and he's like sort of stumbling. He's like, "Oh, what's his name? We're really good friends," and it was Tom Morello. So it was just like, how good of friends are you if you can't remember the guy's name? It's not
Oh,
like I thought he was going to just say some guy who, some guy,
right.
so it's like,
Some guy.
I could have really used that and made it look like, Ted Nugent is a senile old guy who, can't even remember his friends' names. But I felt like even for him who spreads misinformation and, like nonsense, and that's being kind,
Right.
I didn't want to take a cheap shot in that kind of
Well,
way.
you
It just
take the
didn't
high road.
feel like the
That's
right
the
thing to do.
kind of person you are. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's really admirable because it's easy not to, you know.
I mean, I mean, it's makes you sound old to say like, oh, the web changed everything, but it's like, I'm sure there was a difference with that with magazines where, like somebody could buy two magazines that have both interviewed, whoever, Tommy Lee,
Yeah.
um, and they could be different interviews or whatever. But like now it's just like if Rolling Stone reports something and it's juicy, Pitchfork and Spin will jump on it. It doesn't, like, they're not asking for their own exclusive interview. It's
Right.
like there's so much pressure for traffic that it's makes it so tempting to take the low road. And I mean, there's definitely times where like I'll change one of my writers' headlines, um, not really necessarily to be salacious, but it's just like there was a rumor, not even a rumor, it was a joke rumor in country. Somebody said that Luke Bryan was Maren Morris's baby daddy, which is not true and totally unlikely. But like Ellen DeGeneres mentioned it to Luke Bryan on her show. And so, I changed my country writer, my country writer said something like Luke Bryan addresses Maren Morris rumors, and I just somehow put the word baby daddy in it. Just because it's like Ellen did it, like I felt like, okay, it's fair. And like it got a lot of traffic. It probably wouldn't have gotten as much without a headline like
Yeah.
that. So there are times where, you know, another thing, like another weird thing about the web is I used to say this, like, I think it was a Loudwire. We did this, or maybe it was even at radio.com. We had like an Instagram video of some dude playing air drums to Rush at like a football game or some sporting event and doing it terribly, but like really into it. And so we wrote a story and it got like tons of traffic. And I was like, if we interviewed Geddy Lee right now exclusively, it probably might not, it very well may not get those kinds of numbers. And that's just, as
Yeah.
somebody who like prides himself on like preparing for interviews, oftentimes booking my own interviews and like sort of the dance of that, transcribing it, writing it, editing it down, trying to make it interesting and like, good. And then you could really just get more traffic from like some nonsense that took you 3 minutes to write is
And that's
heartbreaking.
the
But
difference between real journalism and blogging. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's a distinction that for somebody like me, it's really important. Like,
yeah.
like for instance, and this is, I sent this to you earlier, but I sent out
Uh,
a press release. And I send out press releases. It has my contact info on it. It's easy to just hit reply and talk to me. But I don't know who every single person is that I send it to because I have big
right.
lists. So I get a lot of people that just reply, don't say who they are, and aren't very specific about what they want. And I just
Yeah,
like, I gotta, can I have a Zoom meeting with
yeah,
this
with KK
client? And
Downing.
I was like, all right, first of all, do you not know the word interview? Second of all, who the hell are you? You
Right.
know, and like, I know people get annoyed when you ask for their traffic, or like where it goes, but like, if
Right.
somebody wants an interview, I kind of have to know that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely places I've worked at that won't disclose it, and so you just have to like, I think maybe CBS was like that. Like you
But then
just have to
that's
take it.
CBS. You know
Yeah,
what I
it's
mean?
CBS, so it's like we're not giving you our numbers, but you could look up how many radio station websites we have. Like
Right. I'm
like
talking about,
some guy,
coveringmetal.com or something like
right?
that. You know what I mean? Like, or covering metal podcast, and it's like,
Yeah,
okay, like I'm down to help people who are not, up
huge, right?
here. But at the end of the day, it's not really my decision. It's like manager's decision and the artist's decision. And if everybody wants to talk to them, it's hard for me to make a case for somebody who, number one, didn't really send me any information and I had to ask
Right.
them for it.
And number two, you've never heard of.
Right, right.
You know, if Andy Green from Rolling Stone asks you to talk to KK, I don't think he needs to explain it that much.
No, no.
So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, Revolver reached out to me about KK.
right,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah. If
Like
Joe or Graham or whoever from Loudwire calls you, there's not a
Joe.
lot of introductions needed.
Yeah,
But
Joe
like
did it yesterday.
oh, did he?
Yeah.
That's funny. But it's you have to, like I was saying to you in our instant message exchange, like you have to have humility. Like I understand that if you work for a small outlet, you have to act like it's the most important thing in the
Right.
world, but you also have to understand that from the publicist's view, they may not have heard of you if you don't know her or him. And like again, like the artist also has to like look down this list of what you're saying, here's what you should do. And if the artist doesn't know what that outlet is, like you've got to make the case. And like I've had to, I think I'd like to think I've always had a sense of humility, but like one of my earlier jobs was at VH1 as a news producer, so I didn't even book my interviews. Like there was a department that did that,
Hmm.
some of whom are now on the nominating committee of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so they're like big people. I mean,
Yeah.
some of my favorite, like you probably know Sandy Alouette or Jen Stilson, those are two of my
Ed
favorite people I've
Stilson.
ever worked with.
Yeah.
And so like they would book it and just basically be like, you're interviewing Dave Grohl and Taylor Hawkins, and here's where and when it's going to happen or whatever, and then you go for like those jobs don't always last. And then, when I was even at radio.com, like it was like a CBS owned thing, but like nobody really knew what radio.com was. We started it. So that makes it really hard to like make the argument, oh, so you have your website, but you syndicate it to these other sites. Like it's hard to explain and they don't know what it is. And you
Right.
have to have humility. And, then I went to Loudwire, and like everybody, generally anybody I'd want to talk to knows what it is, unless I was doing some kind of interview that was not a metal person, but was germane to the metal
Yeah.
community, and then now at Beasley, like, like I said, we have like 60 radio stations. We have WMMR, WDHA, the Rat, the Riff in Detroit. Like those are very significant rock stations.
Mhm.
I'm just mentioning those because we are rock
Yeah.
people, but we have very significant country stations too.
Yeah.
But it's like it's hard sometimes to be like, so here's what we do, here's where it's going to go. So they're like, it's going to be on 8 websites instead of 1, and so you just have to sort of
And
like I was even asking you for a contact at Marvel, just not even Marvel movies, Marvel comics,
right.
just so that I could get approved images. Like sometimes they make news, like there's a Native American Captain America.
Oh,
So I didn't want to just take a screenshot from one of the other sci-fi sites. Like I wanted to make sure we had it. And so I'm still going back and forth with the guy to like explain who we are. And, like it stinks because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, former Loudwire, former VH1 guy. Like I
right.
shouldn't have to do this, but it's like, well, there's no one else who could do it. And if I want to get it done, like I have to grind in a way that I would have done at an earlier job, even though
Right.
I'm at this point. And it's just like, you just have to like shut that ego up and just have some humility and do it. So the fact that a guy who you didn't even know would tell you not only that he wants an interview, but a meeting with KK, like what is he gonna like pitch him on a business opportunity or
No, I
something?
think he
Like,
wanted an interview, but he just didn't say it the right way. You
I mean,
know,
unless it's
like,
like a European guy who doesn't speak English as a
oh
first
no,
language.
he is
He's from
American.
America.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I mean,
um,
I just didn't want to presume, but like, yeah,
yeah,
like
no,
that to me is just, I can't fathom reaching out to somebody about somebody that big. If you're in metal, KK Downing is still a big deal and matters, and people are still interested in what he's doing. And like, to just make the presumption that like, oh yes, I'll get on it right now, and you'll have your Zoom meeting by lunchtime tomorrow, like
Right.
that's just crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, and conversely, like, I was talking to another journalist friend of mine, and he was telling me that a publicist, he pitched, to do this interview for, a bunch of his outlets, and the publicist said yes, and then when I got to scheduling, the person just ghosted him. I don't understand that personally.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know why
mean,
you do that. This is about relationships.
yeah, and I mean, you have to like take this stuff seriously. Like, I pretty much don't. Well, I don't generally do interviews now, um, because it's a radio company. Every radio station has every DJ wants to interview every artist. Even so, there's competition within DJs at the stations, and
Mm,
then all the different stations. So like, us doing it would be kind of an issue.
yeah.
But every once in a while, for our sales team, will ask me to interview a country artist because we have some kind of marketing deal with them. So today I interviewed this young lady named Calista Clark, who is 17, really, really talented. Like, it won't surprise me if she is like headlining arenas within 2 years. Like,
Wow.
she's that, like, she is that good. But like, when it was pitched to me, I'm like, do I have to interview, like, I'm 52, do I have to interview 17-year-olds now? But I could have said no, but like, I like to work with the other departments, and they think I'm good so at that. So like, it's nice to foster those relationships,
You are good at
particularly.
that.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, particularly like, even before the pandemic, I worked from home. Like, I've this job ever since 2019 when I started here. Like, I've never been in an office, so people don't really know me. And if it's something to make people know me a little bit better, it's cool. But like, it does take a little bit of humility to be like, well, when I was at radio.com, I interviewed Jason Aldean and, Luke Bryan and, Little Big Town. And I sat on Willie Nelson's bus with him and interviewed him. And, now I'm interviewing some kid who's like,
but I think
17
that's
years
the
old.
way the industry's changed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
now it's all like it's 17-year-olds with one hit song.
Well, in this woman's
Well,
case,
maybe not in this case, but in general.
yeah. And one thing I will say about country that they're really good at is like, they are good at, like, it's almost like baseball. Like, they have the major leagues, AAA and AA or whatever. And like, they're really good at sticking with somebody for a long time and giving them the shot and really developing them
That's great.
in a way that major labels in rock never, or really with anything, never do. But you're right. I mean, like, top 40 radio is like, back in the day, like, let's say the 90s, maybe even early 2000s, anybody you'd hear on top 40 radio is kind of somebody who everyone knows. But that changed a lot. I mean, like, a kid with a really good SoundCloud song, or what they consider to be good, could get a radio hit, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's like off to the races. And like, will all these guys have long careers, and all these guys and women? Probably not. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. I mean, there is a lot of like, you know the sort of boundaries to success. Obviously, it's still just as hard as ever, because there's only so many slots on the radio.
Yeah.
There's only so much attention people have to listen to new music or get invested in a new star. But people don't need a record label to sign off and say, we're going to give you this much, put you in the studio, blah blah blah. Like, Billie Eilish showed us that. She recorded that whole album in her bedroom with her brother. you know so it's like,
Yeah.
I
I
mean, it was
mean,
the biggest album
I
of the
just,
year.
yeah, I just feel like these kids don't have like rock stars like we did, you
They
know?
don't.
Yeah.
They definitely don't. I mean, it would be great if they did. It was really, I don't know if you saw Grohl's new documentary, What Drives Us, it's called. It
No, but
came
I
out
heard
two
of it.
Fridays ago. It's on Amazon Prime's new, you have to pay extra for this service. It's all
Right.
rock documentaries. I forgot what it's called.
Mm.
But there's a part where Grohl is talking to Lars Ulrich, and they're just kind of saying that, like, and he was also not talking to Flea at the same time, but he was sort of going back and forth between those two conversations. And Flea was saying that, like, it's weird, like, at the end of the 90s, like, a wall went up, and there are the really big bands that could still play arenas forever, and nobody since then has been able to do that. He goes, I might be missing something, but I don't know of any rock bands that have come up since then that could consistently do arenas.
Mm.
Like Florence and the Machine did an arena tour. 1975 did an arena tour, but I don't think they've been able to reproduce that time after
Mm,
time in the
yeah.
way that, like what Lars was saying, and when they were going back and forth, was like Lars was saying, like there's AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, us, you guys, Pearl Jam, but there aren't that many other bands that could just like go out there and say we're touring and sell out arenas or maybe even
Yeah.
stadiums. And I think part of it is because, rock could be an orthodox genre.
Mm,
Like if there's not an actual drummer in the band, it doesn't count. And I could appreciate that, but it also probably to kids
yeah.
probably looks like you're old. Why would that matter? Like
Well,
actually I went to see oh my god, I can't even think of the name of the band. 21 Pilots. 21
oh,
Pilots. And I think I was at CBS. I had somebody reviewing it for me who had to pull out at the last minute. So I went to do the review because I didn't want to do what you were just describing, getting free tickets and then no one shows up and there's no review. So I went with not too much knowledge of them.
mm.
And it's two guys in the band.
Yeah, I
It's the
know. I've
guys.
seen them too. I enjoy them quite a bit.
I thought they were great. I mean, their presentation was like so celebratory and like well designed. It reminded me a bit of like Nine Inch Nails and Jane's Addiction. But
And they made up for the lack of personnel, I feel like.
they did, but it will always be weird to me to see a guy sitting and playing piano and singing, and then he gets up with the microphone and walks away, and the piano is still playing. So it's just
Right.
like, I'm not saying, I know he's a good enough musician. He's not like lip syncing or whatever, but I
Right.
think he just like hits a trigger. Okay, I'm getting up. Like, and there's
Mm,
some computer program that knows where he is in the song, or there's a click track or whatever. There's something that lets the track fill in for him once he gets up. And to me, that's always going to be weird. But I was also, I mean, I was in my 40s and I'm looking around and they sold out 2 nights at Madison Square Garden. I mean, that was insane to me that they could do that. And those kids didn't care. And
right.
so I just realized like I can't sort of force my the priorities for me in music onto them. Like
Mm.
it's just irrelevant. Like you could say that you guys are listening to bullshit, but like they're the next generation. So it's just like, I
Yeah.
mean, then again, there's a whole bunch of kids, like if the White Stripes reunited and got together and toured, they would probably all go. So,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of like throwback fans,
yeah, yeah,
and that's wonderful. I mean, like my nephew who's 10 had like a Queen phase after Bohemian Rhapsody came out. And then he
yeah,
wanted to hear all the yacht rock, and I was very excited. So,
yeah. I mean, that's always awesome when you meet young kids who are like really into rock music and don't just like, I mean, probably most of us like didn't listen to what everybody else listened to either, because if you at least back then, the types of people who worked in music were sort of part of a subculture or like curated their music in a way that didn't make them just a top 40 listener. But
mhm.
today it's like, you go to Pitchfork and they're reviewing like a new Ariana Grande album as if it's like a very serious new release or whatever. And that's not something that I feel like Spin or AP or Raygun would have done in the 90s. Like they
Mm,
wouldn't even bother to review it. And if they did, they would have totally been dunking on it. And I think that lack of snobbery is good. Like I never really liked the idea of people telling other people, oh, you shouldn't listen to that. And if you do, you don't know what you're talking about. Like you could like whatever you want. But it just is like there's also now a lack of the rock ethos that I did and do hold dear. Like I just like seeing a live band playing. Like
mhm.
like I've been referred to as a rockist before. I don't know if you've ever seen that term,
No.
rock.
What is
Yeah, like
that?
it means you like if you're a rockist, ROCKIST, it means that you sort of cling to certain types of ideals in rock music, like the artists write their own songs. Diane Warren does not write your songs for you.
Right, right.
You don't have outside producers making tracks for you that you then sing over. Your band plays live,
Then
stuff
I'm a
like that. Like,
rockist too, so.
I mean, like I loved hip hop as soon as it came out, pretty much, so
Well, I
like
loved
I
hip
love
hop when
that,
it had a message.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
You know,
well, Kendrick has a message. There's a lot of people who have messages, but I get what you're saying. Like a lot of it now just seems so,
I mean, Public
like,
Enemy,
yeah,
Boogie Down Productions, Beastie Boys compared to
Migos.
ASAP
Yeah.
ABC. You know what I mean?
Right, 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 right,
Like,
right.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess like I'm the old lady shaking her fist at the cloud, but eh, I feel like grateful that we had
Yeah.
what we had.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm great. I feel grateful. I saw Soundgarden open up for Voivod. It was Voivod, Soundgarden, and Faith No More. Like, I still have my ticket
Ooh.
stub. I saw Pearl Jam at the Limelight. Like I got to see a lot of cool stuff like that. And like when I was in college, there were too many bands to keep track of. Like I started buying CMJ's monthly magazine because it came with a CD, which was like, what? You could buy a magazine with a CD for $6 and it has all these cool bands you never heard of. Like,
Did you DJ in
obviously,
college?
I DJ'd at a bar. I wasn't like a mixing DJ, but like my last year of college, I DJ'd at my favorite bar.
Nice.
Um, so, I mean, not like,
Like you strike me as somebody that would have worked at the college radio station.
I don't know why I did. I did write some stuff for the two different college newspapers. But our college radio station, like, it was sort of like trying to be like WLIR. I went to college in Hofstra in Long Island.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
but that
Okay.
music was totally like, until I got to college, I never heard of Depeche Mode. I never heard of The Cure. I never heard of the Smiths because I live in the town I grew up in. Like, there obviously there's no internet when I was in high school, and it's like there are no radio stations like that around here, and I just never heard of any of those groups. And at first when I got to college, I didn't like them, like, because I
Mm.
also felt like a snobbery from people who, like, I don't like Iron Maiden or Rush. I like the Smiths and the Cure, and like you could just sort of sense like that they're looking down on you.
Yeah, the
So
synth pop people were very judgy.
yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. So it was like nobody likes that. But eventually, like, I think I heard like The Cure put out Mixed Up, which is their remixes album, and it has a song on it called Never Enough. And I was like, it made me sort of reevaluate my
Hmm.
bias. And then I was listening to the remixes, and just by virtue of living in Long Island, at that time, you couldn't avoid hearing The Cure and hearing Depeche Mode.
Yep.
So it started to seep into my mind, and I got a few other Cure albums. I got Depeche Mode 101 because I was their like new live album at that time, and I loved it. The Smiths, it took me a while to like sort of
They're an
digest that because
acquired taste.
they're definitely an acquired taste, but I love them now. Morrissey's, you know, idiot, the stupid things he says notwithstanding.
Morrissey's
Um,
problematic. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, but like those records that they did were incredible. I got into New Order, and then that leads you back to Joy Division, and then somewhere you find like Susie and the Banshees, and then even the more commercial ones like Tears for Fears,
Right.
and you're like, oh, they don't just have one hit, like, or Simple Minds. So, and I started getting into it, but like I was never part of like the the Hofstra radio station crowd, and I definitely regret that. I would have loved to have been a DJ or whatever.
I DJ'd at WCDB in Albany, and I
Oh,
also interned at WLIR during the summer.
oh wow,
In
that must have
fact,
been really cool.
it was. And in fact, I have a friend that was a DJ there. We're friends now. And she reminded me that when we got Jane's Addiction, when we got Stop in, there was a Spanish part in the beginning, and
Yeah.
nobody in the station spoke Spanish but me. So they called me in to translate.
Senora, sí, senor. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, wild, I completely forgot. And she's like, and now you work with Perry Farrell. And I'm like, oh my God, life is so weird.
I mean, I know I sent you that article that I wrote like last year or something for the 30th of Nothing Shocking.
Mm,
And to me, like they just, when I heard, I can't pretend to be down from day one. Like I did not know of the first Jane's Addiction album on Triple X Records at the time because like
right.
indie records didn't travel like that. But once, I don't even know what turned me on to them. It might have been a record review in like Spin or something. But even just looking at the cover, obviously, what a cheeky title! It's the most shocking album cover I'd ever seen in my life. And
Yeah.
I bought it, I think, based on like hearsay without ever hearing any of the songs. Um, and it just blew my mind. And just like the way they like sort of, combine like the sort of goth Joy Division Cure thing with like punk rock, but also metal, but then also the Grateful Dead. Like I still can't even describe what it felt like to hear that, even all these years later. And
Yeah.
I've interviewed Perry about it for radio.com, and unfortunately radio.com deleted everything from before the merger, so
Yeah.
like that's gone. But I interviewed Dave about it, I guess last year or the year before, for Loudwire, and I just think they are one of the greatest bands of all time. um, I've gone on record saying they're better than Nirvana, which I guess to a lot of people is
Yeah.
heresy. But if nothing else, they certainly made Nirvana's lane. They
I'm
made
not
it possible.
impartial, but I agree.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they are and remain one of the most powerful live experiences I've ever had. I never even saw them before they broke up. My
And
first show,
to wrap it up,
yeah,
honestly, like to bring it full circle, MMR is having Jane's play their barbecue. You're gonna
yep.
go, right?
Oh, I'm definitely gonna go to that.
I'm gonna go too,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so we'll hang out.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I can't wait for that. Yeah, and I mean, they're just the greatest. I wish I had an excuse to interview them, but I really, I
Well,
really
you'll
don't.
just come back and hang out. You don't have to interview.
That's true too.
You know.
I interviewed them for VH1, all four of them together. Chris was the bass player back. This was like the Strays album, so it was like his first
Yes.
run through with them. And it even struck me that they sort of treated him like an equal. Like they for VH1, it could have just been Perry, Dave, and Steven. They didn't need to take him, but they did, and I thought even that was really cool.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, they're just one of my favorite bands, and like I just sort of feel like I don't understand how Nirvana and Green Day and Pearl Jam um, and Radiohead have gotten, and the Foo Fighters are getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame before them. Like they sort of, if it wasn't for them, like they were the band on alternative radio that played guitar like Led Zeppelin.
Mm.
Like they broke down that lane to like louder, heavier
It'll come back
bands that were.
around. I
Huh?
believe it.
I hope so, but I want it to be when they are still performing,
Yeah.
so they could like get up there on that stage and and maybe I love Chris, but like have Eric A on stage with them one last time and like just really like
Yeah.
tear the roof off,
Yeah.
So the other thing I liked about them too, I know that's not what you wanted to ask me about, but now I have to say it, is that well, there are two things. Like you always felt like they expected you to be smart,
Mm.
which like they not to say that metal bands don't, but like you had to sort of follow them a little bit. You
Mm-hmm.
had to be open-minded. You had to be at least a little bit open-minded to get into them, or
Yeah.
you would be almost shunned in a way. And
Right.
the other thing is I as people could say, oh, he has two naked women on the album cover, like that's sexist or whatever, but I felt like the way they looked at women, and even the Red Hot Chili Peppers looked at women, was different. It was like almost like looking at them in equal way, whereas like all the hair metal bands were like, you are my arm candy or whatever. Like
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think Perry in general has a lot of respect for women.
I
And
think he's a romantic guy in a way. I
he
mean,
really is. I mean, if you look at him and his wife, oh my
yeah,
God, it's total couple goals. Like they're
yeah,
like amazing. And they're married 20 years and they have a 16 and an 18-year-old son. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's pretty crazy. Oh, we're almost at an hour. See, I knew I was going to have so much fun talking to you. I would lose track of time.
I could
Um,
come back
yeah,
another
we're
time.
gonna have you back. But yeah, now I've learned that I'm a rockist, and I've learned, yeah, and Rose says I remember my brother telling me he saw a guy in a Slayer shirt at an old school Jane show, and it blew my mind. Yeah, it's true. See, that's the thing. Everyone can love them. Oh, Darren Paltrowitz says keep going. Oh, thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Darren. I actually spoke to Dave Navarro about that exact thing. Like I was saying that, my understanding of in the 90s, people, or in the 80s at Jane's shows, like they just had all these different crowds. And like Dave and Steven, I don't think Perry, but Dave and Steven were into the Grateful Dead,
Mm,
and like that was not something that if you were the type of band that get played on LIR,
mm.
those bands tended to look down on the Grateful Dead, like
Right.
not, or even Led Zeppelin. But he was like, we would have all different every band says we attract all these different crowds, but it's not usually true.
Yeah.
But with Jane's, it really was true, and that's why there's a Lollapalooza. Like that first
Right.
Lollapalooza tour was like pretty revolutionary. Like now it's just like, well, everybody has a festival, and unless it's Danny Wimmer doing rock, or
Right.
one of the jam band, the Peach Festival doing jam bands. Most other festivals are like, we want it to be a very diverse menu of artists. It sort of is like kind of the post iPod culture where you didn't have to buy albums, you could just buy songs,
Yeah.
and that's the way it is now. But back then it was not like that, and that was one of the things that I thought was so cool about that first Lollapalooza tour. The idea of Ice-T being on a tour with Susie and the Banshees, being on a tour with Jane's and Living Color and Nine Inch Nail, like it was mind-blowing. So
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And I was at those shows and I just remember like I was watching Nine Inch Nails. I think we were with Ernie C.
oh wow.
And like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it was just crazy. And you know what? That's the beauty of rock and roll. That's what I think,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. I couldn't get off work that summer to go to the tour, and obviously, I eternally regret that. That would have been, if there's one that I could have taken back or gotten back, like. And then the next year, I did get off to go to Lollapalooza, and it was the one Lollapalooza that was ever rained out ever. It was at Jones Beach. We saw
Oh,
Lush, the opening band, and we saw the Booyah Tribe on the second stage. And then and I had second row seats. I got them through a scalper, and we were watching them set up Pearl Jam's instruments because Pearl Jam was next after Lush, and the skies opened up, and
oh,
like they told everybody to go, like they told everyone to go in their car and turn on LIR, and they would give us instructions, and they're like, shows off, stay, like there's too much lightning, yeah.
damn.
So but just the idea of those shows back then were just so different and wild, and like that would never have happened without Perry Farrell, in my opinion. And even if Jane's Addiction gets in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think there's an argument for Perry to get in as a non-performer
Hmm.
just by virtue of the fact that he created Lollapalooza.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's funny. In every interview I listen to him doing, lately he's been talking about it and he's been just talking about like how he wants to play with different people. He wants to party with the world, and like that I just
Yeah,
love it. I'm grinning ear to ear every time I listen to him do an interview because it's so genuine, you know?
I mean, he's like Flea. I have never interviewed Flea. I have interviewed Perry, but like they both seem so like, I don't want to say childish, but like childlike in their lack of jadedness and like their
Yeah.
sort of sense of wonder about things. And like you could see both of them would actually be into like a brand new band that started 2 weeks ago if they were doing something interesting, whereas other rock stars would be like, yeah, I'm over that. I
Yeah,
don't really.
Perry was talking about some band Taylor turned him on to recently. I have to find the
Really.
name. Yeah, yeah. He was like, "Oh, I love this band." And I was just like, "Really? Oh, okay, I'll listen to them." Um, I want to ask you, what have you ever had an interview that you were doing where you were nervous to talk to the person because you were such a fan?
Uh, yeah, I mean it's weird. I think when I first started, I was just like kind of always nervous, and then I fell into a groove. And then when I was at VH1 again, like it was like one day it's Tom Petty, one day it's this new band Maroon 5, one day it's Alicia Keys, like it was the most thrilling ride you could ever, for me anyway. It was so exciting. And I don't want to say I took it for granted. I was always so grateful. But like I interviewed, Robert Plant, and like it was cool. But a couple of years ago at radio.com, we wrangled a Jimmy Page interview, and I was so nervous I couldn't even speak the day before. Like I was just so like focused on it because he's an intimidating guy, and
Yeah.
like he wants to be the boss. He's the boss. But
Hmm.
like generally when you do an interview, the person you're interviewing isn't like sort of calling the shots. And I know that he was like that, and I didn't want it to go like that. So it was really like I was super, super nervous for that one. I definitely remember that distinctly. And then I interviewed him two more times that year or in the next year and a half because he was doing the Zeppelin reissues. So every time they put out another wave, he would like do some more press.
Mm.
To his credit, he worked that thing. Like he hit
Nice.
the pavement and was selling it. But maybe in my earlier years, I think when I was at VH1, I interviewed PJ Harvey. She's definitely could be intimidating. The first time I interviewed Tori Amos, I was intimidated a little bit, but
Oh, I'm
she's
a
so,
huge fan.
I love her, but she was so sweet. And it's just sort of like, I think with some of these people, as long as you know what you're talking about, then it's all good. And with Tori, it was like that. And
And let me tell you, that is a beautiful thing when you know what you're
yeah,
talking about. Like I listen to a lot of interviews and I know journalists hate it, but my clients feel more comfortable with me on, so I do. I generally am like cooking and listening, but like, um and it just makes me so happy to hear a journalist, like a real journalist, somebody who did their homework, who knows what they're talking about, having a conversation with a guy like Perry or a guy like Tommy Lee, like
yeah.
there's nothing better than that in my mind.
Yeah, and even even for the 17-year-old I interviewed today, I mean, there's not too much to study. She has a 5-song EP, but she's posted tons of her doing covers of other people's songs on YouTube, and that's sort
Yeah.
of Scooter Braun signed her to Big Machine.
Gotcha.
So like she's got Scooter Braun and Scott Borchetta behind her. But like she did this one version of Credence's As Long as I Could. No, Have You Ever Seen the Rain?
Oh,
That got like in the millions of video views, and she's a teenager. So like, but I watched a bunch of her videos and stuff just because it's like, you made it at least this far. I should care enough to do a good job, and to not disrespect you. And also, in that case, like, I would be very careful not to come off as an older guy condescending to a young woman.
right.
She hasn't done that much yet because she has a 5-song EP, but like, Scooter Braun and Scott Borchetta, that's not my world at all.
Right. And
But
I mean, with that sign off, that means something, you
yeah,
know?
it means something. I mean, they could sign anybody. They probably can't go anywhere in America or Europe and not have people throwing demo tapes at them. They're both, so it's like,
Yeah.
like I have to respect that, even if like radio country isn't really what I listen to.
Right.
And so I'll go into that and be as respectful as I can. And I try and treat it in the way that I would treat a Perry Farrell interview or something, just as a
Yeah.
professional and just as a human trying to respect another human who's trying to make it in this business. So
I mean, hey, perfect ending because that's one of the reasons that I like you so much. So, no,
perfect ending. Now shut up.
no, because I have to have you on again because we could go
Okay.
on for hours,
Yeah.
and I want to thank everybody that's been here because we've had some really great, viewers, and I appreciate everybody coming and tuning in
I
for
do
like
too.
over an hour. And Brian, we're gonna do this again because this was way fun.
I'm here for you. If you want to do it again, I'm so happy to do it again.
Awesome. Is there anything you want to promote that you have coming up?
No, it's kind of weird. Ever since I took this job, I've just dove into it, and it's a lot of work. And I haven't had time to do side hustles. I've
You
been
gotta write
trying
a
to get
book.
myself. What's that?
You have to write a book. I want to read a book by you.
I was thinking about it. I'm good friends with John Wiederhorn, so he could at least tell me how it's done because he's written so many. Like at least here I could introduce you to an agent or something like that. But I
Yeah.
also know how hard that industry is right now. Like they don't want to do stuff that isn't a sure bet. But I would love to do one of those 33 and a thirds. Those.
Mm,
I would love to do that. But I also had an idea in mind of like what we were talking about before, like why at the end of the 90s have there been after that there have been no rock like
that's a
how.
very relevant book. I mean, I would definitely read it, and I know everyone, in chat would as well. And it's funny. Our guest from last season, Annie Zaleski, just had her 33 and a third come out.
Heard Duran
Yeah,
Duran, right?
yeah, Duran
I
Duran.
pre-ordered it. I haven't gotten it yet, but then I also realized, and I'm glad Raquel's not here to hear this, or Katty Krasner, if you know her, or
Yeah,
Lori
I
Majewski, if you
do.
know her. I was like, I ordered Annie's book, and I realized I don't even have a copy of Rio, like itself. I just ordered it
Whoa.
because it was her book. I have Duran Duran's Decade, which is their greatest hits album, and I was always, like, I never felt like I must find a copy of it
Right.
on vinyl or whatever, but
Yeah,
now
no,
I'm like, I
I
should
hear
probably
ya.
get that.
I hear
So,
ya. Ro is asking what 33 and a third. Those are
oh
books
wow.
about a particular record. And 33 and a third is like, what is that? The speed that the record
The
player.
speed of a vinyl LP, but like it could be an album from the CD era or whatever. But the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing about it is that I've noticed three different kinds of 33 and a third books. Sometimes they're just like, here's the story of how the Beastie Boys Paul's Boutique was made. Then there is like, here's the story of how Tribe Called Quest debut album changed my life. And
Right.
then there's like, I read Black Sabbath's volume, I don't even remember what album they did it on. I think it was volume 4 or Master of Reality, but it had nothing to do with Black Sabbath. It was a fictional story about a kid who got in trouble in school. The first half of it is how he gets in trouble, and the second half of it is his life in an insane asylum.
Mm.
And just the reason why it was a Black Sabbath book is because this one album was the most important thing to him. So like requiring no sign off, no interviews, none of that. Like, and there's another one too. I think PJ Harvey's To Bring You My Love. The only
Oh.
thing that has to do with her is every chapter is named from a song on that album, and it's in the order
Mm.
that the album is. But other than that, it's a fiction book. So it gives
So,
you 33 and a third gives you a lot of creativity to like do something. And
yeah.
so I've just been trying, I don't think I have a book in me about how an album changed my life. I don't think I could write about
We're
that for
gonna
like
we're
a
gonna
hundred.
talk about this. We're gonna work this out on the air live in the next
Okay.
show.
But
And we're gonna raid Raquel from here. We're gonna raid Raquel because she's DJing right now on
I know
Twitch.
I was going to ask her to watch. I would feel better. And then
Yeah,
like
well
I thought, oh,
well
she's
she'll see it later because I